Some shocking details are now raising new questions after Mississippi teen Nolan Wells was found near Horn Island, 2 days after what was supposed to be a simple 4th of July boat trip with friends. But the part that has people asking questions is not only where Nolan was found, it is what happened before he was found. Because according to the timeline now being discussed, Nolan had traveled to Horn Island with a group of friends, but he did not return to the mainland with them. And that one detail changed everything. Why was Nolan still on Horn Island when the boat left? Did his friends believe he had another ride? Was there a misunderstanding? Or was there a serious mistake made before anyone realized something was wrong? My name is Alex, and in this case, I'm breaking down the timeline surrounding Nolan Wells, the questions about his final hours on Horn Island, and why his family is now asking for the full truth. When someone is found after a search, people expect the story to become clearer. They expect answers. They expect the timeline to start making sense. But in Nolan Wells' case, the discovery did not end the questions. It created more of them. Nolan was found near Horn Island after a 4th of July weekend boat trip, and that alone is heartbreaking. But the reason this case has caught so much attention is because Nolan was not supposed to be out there alone. He had gone to Horn Island with friends. That is where the whole story begins. Not with the search, not with the discovery, but with the moment Nolan traveled to that island with a group, and later, that group returned without him. Think about that for a second. This was not a regular beach where someone could walk to the road, call a ride, or wait outside a store. Horn Island is a remote barrier island. You usually need a boat to get there, and you need a boat to leave. So when Nolan did not return with the people he went there with, the question became bigger than just where he was. It became about what was said before the boat left. Who saw him last? Did Nolan clearly say he was staying? Did he have another ride? Did anyone confirm that ride? And if the answer was only an assumption, then why was that enough? That is the contradiction at the center of this case. A holiday trip with friends became a search. The search became a heartbreaking discovery. And now the discovery has become a timeline full of unanswered questions. Because before anyone can understand how Nolan was found near Horn Island, they first have to understand what happened before he was found. Before Nolan Wells became part of a timeline, he was a real person. He was 18 years old. He was from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. And to the people who knew him, he was not just a name being repeated in reports. He was a son. He was a friend. He was someone people expected to see again after that holiday weekend. Nolan was also connected to football. He had been around the game through Ocean Springs High School and later through Southwest Mississippi Community College. But this story is not about turning him into a sports headline. It is about understanding that Nolan had a life before Horn Island. He had people who cared about him. He had teammates. He had family. He had a future people believed in. And that is why this case feels so painful. Because when people talk about the timeline, the boat, the island, and the questions, it can start to sound like a puzzle. But for Nolan's family, this was never just a mystery. This was their loved one. This was someone who left for what should have been a normal 4th of July weekend and was expected to come back home. That part matters because the reason people care about these details is not just because Nolan was found near Horn Island. It is because he should not have been there alone without clear answers about how it happened. He had gone to the island with friends. He was supposed to return from that trip. And when he did not, the people who loved him were left trying to understand something no family should ever have to piece together. Where was he last seen? Who was he with? What was said before the boat left? Did anyone know he was not returning with the same group? And when did the worry finally become fear? These are not small questions to Nolan's family. These are the questions that sit in the middle of their grief. Because before the public started asking questions online, Nolan's family was already living the worst version of them. They were not watching a story unfold from the outside. They were inside it, waiting, calling, searching, and trying to understand how a young man with so much life ahead of him went to Horn Island for a holiday trip and never came home. Around 3 p.m., everything changed. That is the part of the timeline people keep coming back to, because according to the known details, Nolan Wells was last seen around that time on Horn Island. And after that, the story becomes harder to sit with. Nolan had gone to the island with a group, but when that group eventually returned to the mainland, Nolan was not on the boat with them. That one detail is what turned this from a sad missing person case into something people cannot stop questioning. Now, the reported explanation from the friends is important, and it has to be said carefully. According to public reporting, authorities were told Nolan may have chosen to stay behind. There was also an understanding that he may have been expected to return with someone else. Officials have also said the friends were cooperating with investigators. So, on one side, there is the possibility that this was a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe the island was busy. Maybe there were people around. Maybe Nolan was seen talking with someone. Maybe the group thought he had another ride. Maybe they believed he was not stranded. And in that moment, it did not feel dangerous to leave. That is one way to look at it. But then the other side asks a much harder question. If Nolan truly chose to stay, who was he supposed to leave with? Was that person identified? Did anyone confirm he had another boat ride back? Did Nolan clearly say, "I'm not coming with you"? Or did everyone just assume? Because there is a big difference between knowing someone has a way home and hoping they probably do. And when you are talking about a remote island, that difference matters. This is where the viewer almost becomes part of the investigation. You have to look at the same timeline from both directions. One side sees confusion on a crowded holiday beach. The other side sees a risky assumption that should have been checked before that boat ever pulled away. And for Nolan's family, that 3 p.m. window is now everything. Not Monday morning, not the search, not even the discovery. The real question starts in that moment, when Nolan was still on Horn Island and the people he arrived with were preparing to leave. Because sometimes the most important part of a case is not what happened after someone disappeared. It is the last decision made before anyone realized they were gone. Around 3 p.m., the story changed. That is the part of the timeline people keep going back to, because Nolan was reportedly last seen around that time on Horn Island. And after that, the questions start building. Nolan had traveled to the island with a group of friends, but later, that group returned to the mainland without him. Now, that detail alone does not prove what happened. It does not prove anyone had bad intentions. It does not give the public the right to attack anyone online. But it does create a serious question. Why did Nolan not come back with the people he went there with? According to public reporting, officials have said Nolan may have chosen to stay behind or he may have been expected to return with another group. Officials have also said the friends were cooperating with investigators. So that is one side of the story. Maybe Nolan wanted to stay longer. Maybe there were other people nearby. Maybe another boat was supposed to bring him back. Maybe his friends believed he had a plan, and in that moment, they did not think they were leaving him in danger. On a busy holiday island, that version may have seemed possible to them. But then the other side asks everyone to slow down and look closer. Did Nolan clearly say he was staying? Who was he supposed to return with? Was that person identified? Did anyone confirm he had a safe ride back? Was there a real plan? Or was it just an assumption? Because there is a big difference between knowing someone is safe and thinking they are probably fine. And when that person is on a remote island surrounded by water, that difference matters even more. This is the part Nolan's family is now forced to replay. Not just the moment Nolan was later found, not just the search, but the moment before the boat left. What was said? Who checked on him? Who saw him last? And did anyone truly know how Nolan was getting back to the mainland? Because the most important part of this case may not be when Nolan was found. It may be what happened before the boat left. The friend's explanation is one of the most important parts of this case, because, according to public reporting, the understanding given to authorities was that Nolan may have stayed behind by choice, or that he may have been expected to return with someone else. And, to be fair, that version has to be looked at carefully. Horn Island was not empty that weekend. It was the 4th of July. There were boats around, there were people on the beach, groups were moving in and out. From the outside, it may have looked like Nolan was not alone at all. Maybe he was seen talking to someone. Maybe there was another group nearby. Maybe the friends believed he had already made another plan. Maybe in that moment they thought, he's fine. He knows what he's doing. He'll get back. And if that is what they truly believed, then this becomes more complicated than just saying they left him there and nothing else matters. Because investigators have to look at intent, timing, statements, and what each person actually understood in that moment. But here's where everything changes. A belief is not the same as confirmation. Thinking someone has a ride is not the same as knowing they have a ride. Assuming someone is safe is not the same as making sure they are safe. And that is the gap people cannot ignore. Because if Nolan arrived at Horn Island with that group, people want to know why his plan to leave was not physically confirmed before the boat pulled away. Who checked? Who asked him directly? Who confirmed the other ride? Who knew exactly who Nolan was supposed to return with? And if nobody can clearly answer that, then the concern becomes bigger, not because the public should attack the friends, not because anyone online has enough facts to decide everything, but because the decision to leave a remote island without someone who came with you is serious. Even if nobody meant for anything bad to happen, a careless assumption can still have consequences. That is what makes this case so heavy. One side may see a misunderstanding on a crowded holiday island. The other side sees a moment where someone should have stopped and made sure Nolan was safe. And that is where the case sits right now, between misunderstanding and responsibility. One detail people keep coming back to is the phone. And this part has to be handled carefully because not every detail has been fully confirmed in public. But reports, family concerns, and public discussion have raised a serious question. Did Nolan have access to his phone after the group left Horn Island? That may sound like one small part of the story, but in a place like Horn Island, it matters a lot. Because on a remote island, a phone is not just something you use for pictures or messages. It can be your contact, it can be your location, it can be your way to call family, it can be your way to ask a friend for a ride. And in a serious moment, it can be the one thing that connects you back to help. So if Nolan was staying behind by choice, the next question is simple. Did he have a way to communicate? Did anyone know exactly where he was? Did anyone check that he had what he needed before the boat left? Because if he did not have access to his phone, then leaving without him becomes even harder for people to understand. That would mean Nolan may have been on a remote island without one of the strongest ways to reach anyone. And that is why this detail has become so important to the people following the case. But there is another side too. If the group truly believed Nolan had another ride, they may not have understood the risk in that moment. Maybe they thought he was with other people. Maybe they thought he had already made plans. Maybe they believed the island was busy enough that he was not really alone. And that is why this case cannot be handled with emotion alone, because people can make wrong assumptions without realizing how serious those assumptions are until it is too late. Still, the question remains, was Nolan's safety confirmed, or was everyone operating on what they thought was true? That is the part people cannot ignore, because belief is not the same as confirmation. And on Horn Island, that difference could mean everything. The phone question does not solve the case by itself, but it changes how people feel about the timeline. For Nolan's family, the trip was supposed to end when he came home, but he did not. And that is where the fear started to grow. At first, maybe it felt like a delay. Maybe he was still with friends. Maybe he was somewhere with bad service. Maybe there was a simple explanation that would make everything make sense. But then time kept passing. Calls were made, messages were sent, people started checking with each other. And slowly, that worry turned into something no family ever wants to feel. Because there is a moment when waiting becomes panic. There is a moment when he is probably just late turns into something is wrong. And for Nolan's mother, that moment became serious enough that she reported him missing after he did not return. From there, the search began. Agencies and volunteers got involved. Boats went back toward Horn Island and the surrounding water. People started looking through the area, hoping for any sign that Nolan was still safe. And that part is painful because his family was not just waiting anymore. They were searching. They were asking. They were trying to understand how a holiday trip could turn into this. But by the time the search started, the most important gap in the timeline had already happened. That is the part that makes this case so troubling, because the search could look for Nolan, but it could not go back and change the moment before the boat left. So now the questions become even more important. Who last saw Nolan? When did the group leave Horn Island? When did everyone realize Nolan had not come back? Was there any delay in understanding how serious the situation was? And when the friends returned without him, did anyone immediately know something was wrong? These are not small details. They are the pieces that may explain how long Nolan was unaccounted for, who believed what and when the concern should have turned into action. For Nolan's family, the search was not just about finding him. It was about understanding the truth of those missing hours. Because before officials were looking around Horn Island, before volunteers joined in, before the case became public, there was already one question sitting there. Why did Nolan not come home with the group he went there with? The search was not only about finding Nolan, it became a search for the truth of what happened before anyone called for help. Nolan's family is not asking people online to convict anyone. They are asking for transparency. And there is a big difference between the two. They are not saying the public should attack the friends. They are not saying strangers on the internet should decide the whole case from comments, clips, or rumors. What they want is simple. They want the timeline checked. They want the statements reviewed. They want the missing pieces explained. And that is why the family retained attorney Ben Crump. Now, that does not mean wrongdoing has been proven. It does not mean this case should be judged before the final facts are known. It means Nolan's family wants a thorough and independent look at what happened before he was found near Horn Island. Because for them, too many questions are still sitting there. Who last saw Nolan? What exactly did each person say happened? Was another group involved? Was Nolan's ride back to the mainland ever confirmed? Did he have access to his phone? Are there videos or photos from that day? Are there GPS records, phone records, or witness accounts that can help explain the gap? And what will the final official findings show? Those questions matter because families do not always accept an early explanation when the timeline still feels incomplete. If the answer is an accident, they still want to know what led to it. If Nolan was believed to have another ride, they want to know who that ride was with. If people thought he was safe, they want to know what made them believe that. And if nobody confirmed his plan before leaving, they want to know why. That is not about creating a mob. That is about accountability. Because when someone goes to a remote island with a group and does not return with them, the people who loved him are going to ask questions. They are going to replay every detail. They are going to wonder if one check, one call, one conversation, or one delay before leaving could have changed the outcome. And that is the painful part of this case. Even if nobody meant for anything terrible to happen, Nolan's family still has to live with the possibility that something was missed. So for Nolan's family, the question is not only how he lost his life, it is whether someone missed the chance to help him earlier. Nolan went out for a holiday trip and never came home. That is the part of this case that still sits heavy, because before the questions, before the search, before people started arguing over the timeline, this was supposed to be a normal 4th of July weekend. Nolan went to Horn Island with friends. He did not return with them. His family reported him missing. And later, officials confirmed he had been found near the island. That is the timeline in its simplest form. But simple does not mean complete, because the part that still has people asking questions is what happened between Nolan being last seen and the boat leaving Horn Island without him. One side says this may have been a tragic misunderstanding, a busy island, boats everywhere, people moving around, a quick assumption. Maybe Nolan was believed to have another ride. Maybe the group thought he was with someone else. Maybe nobody understood how serious that moment would become until it was already too late. And if that is true, then this case may be about a terrible mistake that no one expected to end this way. But the other side says that explanation is not enough because Horn Island was not a regular beach. It was a remote barrier island. If someone comes there by boat with a group, People want to know why that person's way back was not clearly confirmed before the group left. Not guessed, not assumed, confirmed. That is why every detail still matters. The official findings matter. The witness statements matter. The phone questions matter. Any photos, videos, GPS records, or messages from that day could matter because one missing detail could change how people understand the entire timeline. And right now, Nolan's family is not asking the public to guess. They are asking for the full truth. They want to know what was said, who saw him last, who believed he had a ride, and why nobody made sure he was safely returning before the boat pulled away. The ending is known. Nolan is gone. But the beginning, the part that explains why he was still near Horn Island after the boat left, is still waiting for a complete answer. So I want to ask you this. If someone travels to a remote island with a group, should that group be responsible for making sure everyone returns safely? Or was this a tragic misunderstanding that no one saw coming? Tell me what you think.